Welcome back to Sir Ela Philosophy, Episode 12, Free Will and Freedom. Let's get started. Paragraph 1. When we conduct ourselves in relation to evaluations gathered from our exercise of free will, we have freedom and liberty. Our freedom and liberty involves our free movement in relation to our physical existence, justified by that physical existence. Therefore, in order to know our physical existence to obtain our justifications to our movements, we must operate with free will. Free will is without any adhesive frame reference that would skew our incoming reality by the attachment of master and sliver ideas to change this incoming reality. It allows our experiential existence to experience reality to its truest form. Free will is possible when we achieve a free flow framed reference. Paragraph 2. Our free flow framed reference allows our physical world inputs to remain accurate. When we require incoming ideas from our physical world to maintain their required connections to the physical world, we set aside our adhesive frame reference. This is true whether it involves our direct experience from our senses or involves our indirect experiences from our senses of oral, visual, and written language. Our free flow frame reference provides us free will to know what proper and improper behavior is because we have reality properly positioned. Presented here is a modeled representation of a free flow framed reference. Paragraph 3. Our adhesive frame reference allows our physical world inputs to be altered by existing internal false realities, resulting in further inaccuracies. When we do not require our incoming ideas from our physical world to maintain their required connections to the physical world, we lose accountability to our sliver idea of reality that comes with our original physical world experience. This is true whether it involves our direct experience from our senses or involves our indirect experience from our sense of oral, visual, and written language. This can only result in the mixing of non-reality-based ideas with reality-based ideas without properly accounting for the movement of the sliver idea of reality. Our adhesive frame reference cannot provide us free will, as we are in a relationship with ourselves only, and not ourselves in relation to physical reality. Here is a modeled representation of an adhesive framed reference. Paragraph 4. When we have a free flow framed reference, we allow proper evaluation and accountability to ideas. When we have accurate realities reach our evaluative abilities, we can measure back to construct the true reality to which we live in. We build our accountability to ideas when we maintain thesis-based reality within our thought existence. If we have an adhesive framed reference, we inappropriately, inaccurately, and deceptively alter the ideas to manufactured false reality. Here we do not measure back to physical reality, but to our mental reality. Our thought existence can measure against our mental animations of any sort. We can only lead ourselves to grossly inaccurate views of our physical existence and lead ourselves to many types of thought perversions. Thought perversions are the creation of manufactured realities. A free flow framed reference only uses thesis-based reality, whereas an adhesive frame reference mixes both thesis-based and manufactured-based realities. Paragraph 5. When we have a free flow framed reference, it allows us to evaluate to a balance properly. During our free flow framed reference, our evaluate to balance brings in our physical world, and it allows us evaluations without preconceived impinging forces. When we have a free will, we allow ourselves to engage in our internal physical structure to balance the physical world experience. This allows us to understand our reality. We then know how to respond physically and behaviorally because we have our thesis-based justifications provided to us by physical existence. Paragraph 6. Once we have our physical world evaluation, we have to accept thesis-based justifications for actions or for non-actions. When we have our understanding of physical existence and our understanding of Sartre philosophy, we have at each individual level a truly justified and moral position where we can apply our thesis-based justifications. We now have our justifications for our movement. Our thesis-based justification illuminates our freedom and liberty. In this way, we can release our freedom and liberty while at the same time we can identify and stop unjustified coercive action. Paragraph 7. Our free will depends on the characteristics of our framed reference. When we measure our ideas against the human mind, it places us in a vast ocean where we float without any reference. If we push against another boat, that is another idea, we have two different forces that result in movement not where we wanted to go. If we push against land, we move to where we want to go. If we have a free flow framed reference, we can achieve free will for ourselves. If we have an adhesive framed reference, we are at the mercy of any residual or parasitic actions. When we measure our ideas against the chaos of the human mind, we can feel as if we are in a state of free will. Nevertheless, the same unaccountable and chaotic result feels as if we are free because we have attached ourselves to a floating, manufactured idea. When we measure against the physical world, we then are free to make definitive actions with definitive movements to our will. Paragraph 8. When we have free will and a measurement system of thought to accountability, we can then claim self-responsibility. Our self-reliance and individual self-responsibility means we must engage in free will and align ourselves to the truth of existence. Only then can we know what the responsible conduct is. When we, as a social group, do not meet this minimum, we remain bound to our responsibility because physical existence holds our equations of accountability. Our adults and educators have the obligation to move our understanding of existence to the truth of existence. We as a species have the capacity. Nevertheless, we are not born responsible. We have to understand our reality and learn how we can achieve responsibility. There has to be a path from when we are born to when we become an adult that leads us to our independence. Our independence must maintain our thesis morality equations. Our independence then means we have individual obligations in terms of our behavior to all other individuals and as one individual of all individuals to any individual. Self-responsibility is equal to all, as our equations in physical existence are the same for all. Paragraph 9. Despite that self-responsibility is an equal obligation to all, our self-responsibility in terms of understanding and having conscious awareness of it is dependent on our differences. It does so because our ability to understand and achieve it falls under physical human differentiation. Footnote 12. Our physical existence as human beings has two expressions. We have equality and inequality between us. We can express this through mathematical equations. The episodes on equal thesis morality and unequal thesis morality will outline the distinction. End of footnote. This physical human differentiation includes both the physical structure of our human mental capacity and environmental learning. The ability to learn, achieve, and express self-responsibility can vary between people like the ability to dance or do mathematics. No individual can be self-responsible by any a priori knowledge of it. Therefore, it is an ideal that we must strive to achieve. It becomes part of the idea of creating oneself. This means that those of us that achieve conscious understanding of self-responsibility have an obligation to assist in the development of self-responsibility in others. Paragraph 10. Self-responsibility for Jean-Paul Sartre came from his idea that all human beings have freedom found in non-freedom. It goes something like this. We are not free to be not free. We have no choice but to be in a state of freedom. Here are some words of Sartre that show this position. Bibliography 4, page 567, quote, I am condemned to be free. This means that no limits to my freedom can be found except freedom in itself, or, if you prefer, that we are not free to cease being free. End of quote. I think this idea of freedom involved our evaluate to balance to our physical existence. We are not free not to engage in evaluate to balance. Because it arises out of awareness and not consciousness, we can ignore it consciously. In the end, whether Sartre and I agree may be more in my misunderstanding of him or his presentation. In Being and Nothingness, he wrote, Bibliography 4, page 559, it is strange that philosophers have been able to argue endlessly about determinism and free will, without ever attempting to make explicit the structures contained in the very idea of action. The concept of to act is to modify the shape of the world. It is to arrange means in view of an end. It is to produce an organized instrumental complex such that by a series of concatenations and connections, the modification finally produces an anticipated result. We should observe first that an action is on principle intentional. End of quote. Notice he was attempting to focus on action. Our actions are physical events. Nevertheless, his structures were intentional. This intentional placed his evaluation right back into our human mind. He ended up doing the same as the philosophers that he complained about in the same paragraph. Paragraph 11. Sartre placed action with intention. If action was intentional, what was behind his idea of intentional? Sartre claimed we were free because we had no choice not to be free. If action is on principle intentional, then his intentional holds within it the idea of freedom. The choice was intentional, deliberate, and not made as a cause and reaction. His position that we were free because we had no choice not to be free contorted the ideas of free, freedom, action, and intention. We have to straighten out this twisted mess. To start, we can say we have to act because we are not free not to act. Even not acting is a result of action. It seemed that Sartre suddenly animated freedom not only in a narrowband form without its acknowledgement, but changed the typical master idea of freedom. Freedom in the broadband form means that we initiate action without any impinging forces. We have no unknown and unseen force in play. The broadband view of freedom could even include that we operate independent to the physical world. In the narrowband form from Sartre, freedom becomes a state to a force to choose action. Thus, we have a forced choice within its position in the physical world. Therefore, our no impinging forces became impinging forces to some action. He placed force behind the idea of freedom, which was an idea that contained the idea, quote, no impinging force. He forced us to choose action because we were not free not to act. We were not free not to act owing to the movement of the physical world, which we call time. Now we have eliminated the idea of freedom completely from the view by Sartre that we are not free to be not free. He measured his not free with impinging forces. His position that we were not free to be not free was simply, we are with impinging forces to be with impinging forces. We now see that he unnecessarily obscured his position. Paragraph 12. Sartre was not acknowledging physical existence to his ideas of responsibility and freedom. We can see this when he wrote, Bibliography 4, page 707, quote, "The essential consequence of our earlier remarks is that man, being condemned to be free, carries the weight of the whole world on his shoulders. He is responsible for the world and for himself as a way of being." We are taking the word responsibility in its ordinary sense as consciousness of being the incontestable author of an event or of an object. End of quote. This, condemned to be free, has its physical connection to our evaluate to balance. We have a hardwired aspect for this evaluation of our surroundings and to any subsequent idea animation that may be thesis or manufactured. Until we acknowledge this connection to physical existence, his presentation would not be clear. Once we accounted for this relational aspect of his argument, it becomes clear what he is saying. He continued with, Bibliography 4, page 708, quote, "What happens to me happens through me, and I can neither affect myself with it or revolt against it, nor resign myself to it. Moreover, everything which happens to me is mine." End of quote. Here we see his version of our evaluate to balance. When we understand his position that we are responsible comes from the input of our physical existence through our evaluate to balance, he directed his view of responsibility not from non-impinging forces, but from the impinging forces of physical existence. Paragraph 13. The idea that we are not free to be not free can be better understood by stating we are required by nature to evaluate to a balance, to which we must make our action. Our evaluate to balance moves us because it is the movement of physical existence, which we measure as time. When we move with our evaluate to balance, we move to make our action. The how we evaluate to balance becomes important. We must maintain an open free will. When we do, we move away from a denied free will. When we have a free will, we have a free flow framed reference that exists. We also then align with reality. When we maintain a denied free will, we have an adhesive framed reference that exists. Now we have a break from reality. We, by our own physical nature, must engage in evaluate to balance and move to action. Our mental life moves as if we were on a snowy hillside sliding down. If our evaluate to balance is not to act, then this becomes the action. Nature forces us to evaluate to balance, which is not our choice. This means nature forces us to develop a thought system. If we want to break the chains the coercive animal has on our freedom and liberty, we must keep our ideas measured against physical existence. Paragraph 14. We cannot confuse freedom with free will. Kant stated, Bibliography 16, page 70, quote, "But freedom is a mere idea, in parentheses, ideal conception, the objective reality of which can in no wise be shown according to laws of nature, and consequently not in any possible experience, and for this reason it can never be comprehended or understood." End of quote. Although our idea of freedom does not exist in a form like our orange, it does come about from our observation of the physical world and its sometimes random and free-floating aspects that we can observe. We can animate the random movement of objects and remove all ideas of hard form. These ideas go back to our perceptual capacity for spatial and movement recognition. Freedom that we animate is an idea with no impinging forces. This requires the idea of forces, which we see affect change as they force against something. We then eliminate the sliver idea of impinging forces while keeping the effect of something. Nevertheless, our free will idea does not involve no impinging forces from our own mental forces to incoming sensory existence or in our mental animations in thought existence. Our idea of freedom under the idea of no impinging forces is too broadband to bring clarity. It ignores our physical existence. Freedom in physical existence and relational to our thesis morality splits freedom into two types of impinging forces against freedom. One impinging force comes from manufactured coercion by the misplacement of the sliver idea of reality, whereas thesis coercions can justify impinging forces and restrict freedom. Our law that restricts our freedom to murder is a thesis-justified coercion placed onto ourselves. Paragraph 15. We long have had the idea that we cannot comprehend ideas such as freedom. Interestingly, Kant followed his statement in the above paragraph with Bibliography 16, page 70, quote, "And for this reason it," that is freedom, "can never be comprehended or understood, because we cannot support it by any sort of example or analogy." End of quote. I found this interesting because my first reaction was, if we cannot comprehend it, then why do we have an idea of it? However, this was his precise position, absurd as it was. Nevertheless, he did not seek the physical basis for the idea of freedom. We obtain the idea of freedom by comprehension of our spatial environment and our movement in our spatial environment with the removal of the idea of hard form. He did not understand that ideas do arise from a parallel group of ideas that attach together to make a full idea. We can then strip away one by one, or in bunches, or all attached sliver ideas, leaving only one idea, like 5 without any relational aspects of mathematics. We conceive the idea of freedom from perceiving the experiences of our world. We experience the release of a bird, our child leaving to study at a university, and obtain a sliver idea of a release of an impinging force. We experience the appearance of random movement of animals, the feel of wind, and obtain the sliver idea of no noticeable impinging forces. These experiences carry all the parallel aspects of the experiences to ideas, and later we strip away the attached sliver ideas and gain the idea of freedom. Freedom equals no impinging forces. Kant saw an interaction of the laws of reason independent of natural construction. He saw the idea of freedom as a singular idea that he never attached to the experience behind other ideas. Through his animation, freedom was broken away from physical reality and made mysterious. Paragraph 16. We need clarity in our intellectual discussions. When we have people that write large books, the question that comes to my mind is why? Does the discussion require it? Are we dealing with mental animations that is leading us to truth, understanding, and to a better society? If it is simply an individual saying a lot of things because they receive attention, or they like to be thought of as some genius, or it perpetuates some academic position, what I claim we often end with is a large heat sink that diverts future thought by ramming human thought into the ground. The tragedy is that we send our young thinkers down into the basement to perpetuate old ideas that arise from the motivations of self-absorption and self-gratification. Some people have recognized this. Sir Thomas Pope Blount in 1691 wrote, Bibliography 19, Essay 2, page 33, quote, "That which we so much admire under the name of learning is only the knowing the fancies of particular men." End of quote. Paragraph 17. Our idea of freedom needs to be relational to physical existence. Our idea of freedom requires actions that occur in the physical world. By the result of physical existence interaction with us to our evaluate to balance, we come to our actions. When we have conflict between individuals and groups of individuals to their evaluate to balance, we have the clashes of freedom. Therefore, we tend to address freedom only when it clashes. We may know this clash at the time, or we may know it later. This means that just because we do not have a clash immediately around us, it does not mean we are free to engage in action. When we have clashes occur or become known, we have to resolve them by human thought. Because we have to use human thought, when we use a system of thought without accountability, we end with coercion. A system of thought with accountability would measure against our physical realities to our evaluate to balance, which contains thesis evaluations and provides the thesis-based justifications for the correct course of action. We know that to have freedom and liberty, we must have a free flow framed reference to allow free will to input physical existence without distortion. We can then determine our thesis-based actions to prevent coercion and to release our freedom and liberty. That ends Episode 12. In Episode 13, we will cover morality connected to our physical existence. In meantime, if you have subscribed, thank you. If you have not, please do. And remember to lovingly hit that like button.